Hey guys. You know those days when you have a gazillion things that you should be doing and you're just not motivated to do any of them? I'm having one of those days. Anywhere you go, give it all. So I thought maybe I would share with you my thoughts about surfing because what could be more opposite what I'm doing right now, which is lounging in bed when it's not even dark out yet. Like I'm already in my pajamas. I am ready for bed. I keep thinking back to Biarritz and watching the surfers and thinking at the time, getting all motivated to like come back and focus again on my YouTube exercise videos so I could strengthen my squats and my core, and I could do like that leap, that leap from like lying down to standing up thing that you have to do if you want to be a surfer. And I went down this whole rabbit hole of thinking like, yes, I tried surfing like 15, 20 years ago, something like that. And I wanted to drown. Like it was so hard. And just getting out to the break in the waves was virtually impossible. And I blame it on my boobs, honestly, because I have large breasts. And it means that when you're lying down on the surfboard and you put your arms in the water, they don't go all the way in. Like flat chested people, they can lie on their board and the distance between like their arm is in the water from their armpit down. For me, like I still have like 4 inches or something of my arm that is never going to get in the water because there's like a boob that is keeping me above the board. So aside from that excuse, which somebody I'm sure is going to point out, like that there's some really famous surfboarder that, is like a triple D or something like that, that's going to blow my theory out of the water. But until that happens, I'm convinced that that's one of the reasons why I can never successfully surf. But then there's the whole sitting on the board, which looks so relaxing when you see the surfers out in the waves, just like propped up and watching the waves come in and maybe chit-chatting. But you have to have really loose hips to sit like that. And the boards are really wide. And again, I'm short, so my legs, it's a problem. And then there's the whole getting up on the board from that straddled position on the board to your feet in rolling water. And this is where, when I was watching the surfers this past weekend, I thought, maybe if I can start doing that on dry land on a yoga mat, maybe I could like try surfing again. And maybe this time it would work and I could like get all into surf culture and I could be all zen and yoga-ish and go vegan and like get dreadlocks and have a whole new life. Clearly there are many flaws in that little fantasy trip that I went down. However, putting that all aside, putting my future surf career aside for a moment, I think that the whole surf experience can translate into an approach for life. And I know that this is not a new analogy, but I just love the details. Like, there are so many ways that they approach the wave or choose not to approach the wave. Like, there are things that they see when they're in the waves that from the shore we can't see. Like, there are so many times when I think there's a perfect wave approaching, and then I notice that none of the surfers are taking that wave. So clearly they see something I don't see. And it's such a perfect analogy for life, I think, that when you're in the moment, you see things that somebody from outside of your life doesn't see or doesn't understand that affects the choices that you make. Also, I think it's interesting how surfers get off waves. So there are so many different ways to end the ride, right? You can completely get clobbered by the wave itself. Like it can break unexpectedly or break really forcefully, and you go flying and you tumble into the white water stuff. Or you can ride the wave all the way in, and then there's this moment where the surfer decides that they are done. And I love this moment because there's this kind of pause, and you can see them stop moving with the movement of the wave and just drop into the ocean. And it's like a release, like giving full power over to gravity and saying a big thank you for the ride. And then there are those who make a much more flamboyant exit, and they decide to take a quick turn and hit the edge of the wave to go flying over it, and they do this like leap, even though they're tethered to the board, and the board goes one way and they go the other, and they're flying in the air. But there's this joy, and again, this pure freedom and trust that they're going to land okay. And they can be like 6 feet, 10 feet up in the air, and there's like not a concern in their body. And that, I think, is really exciting. And then there are the times that, for whatever reason, they see something that from the shore I don't see, and they can be riding the wave, and suddenly they decide that they're done with the ride, and they peel off of it and stop the journey, even though the wave keeps going, even though the wave hasn't broken yet, even though they haven't fallen. They just decide, no, this is enough. I'm going to go back out and sit a little bit longer. And there's something about all of those active choices that I love, and I'm kind of envious of, because there are so many times in my life that I don't feel like I'm making active choices, that I'm just letting the waves control me and not participating in the ride. The bells are ringing. It must be, what time is it? It's the quarter hour. They ring once for the first quarter hour, twice for the half hour, 3 times for the 3/4 hour, and then the hour. And then they do these random, like, pealing symphonies at odd times. And even after 5 years, I can't figure out what triggers those ringing bells, but they're delightful. But I don't know what they're supposed to mean. I love the church bells. It's something that I didn't grow up hearing. And now I live like just a couple blocks from a church, and the sound echoes, and it wakes me up in the morning. Well, it doesn't wake me up in the morning, but it kind of alerts me in the morning. I've already been awake a couple hours. They don't start until 8 a.m. They're so old-fashioned. It makes me think of like back in the day when the church bells really were your only time barometer, that and the sun. Such a simpler time. I think that's the crux of this fascination with the surfers that I have, is this simplicity. I yearn for simplicity. Like, I'm not a minimalist. I admire minimalists, but I'm not one. I like stuff. I'm also not a huge consumerist either. There's like that middle ground. If I were a surfer, I would probably... I didn't know actually that I could be a surfer I don't know that I would have the patience, because this is the other thing. The other thing that fascinates me is that, so these surfers go out there, and on a crowded day, on a day where the wave is really good, there can be like 40 surfers out there in a really small area. And it doesn't seem like they're talking to each other, but they're in a communal environment at the same time. So they're with each other, but also apart. And it's kind of how I feel when I go to a coffee shop. Like, I don't necessarily talk to people at the other tables, but I know they're there. And having them around me, feeling like I'm part of the experience, even though we're not actively interacting with each other, we're still having a communal experience. And I love that. And so I admire that in the surfer community. I also find it fascinating how a surfer can go out and spend, hours in the water, and maybe they only do 2 waves, or maybe they don't do any waves. The other day, I saw this group, there were probably 6 of them that went out, and they went out past where all the other surfers were congregated, like past where the waves were really breaking to a flatter area. They probably spent like 45 minutes out there. They didn't even attempt to ride a wave. They just were out there sitting on their boards, like hanging out on the water. And that's cool too. Like having that ability to appreciate your experience without expectation. Or maybe you do have expectation. Maybe you go out wanting to catch a wave and you don't. The water isn't right, the waves aren't the right size, they're not breaking the right way. Do you decide that that day has been a failure because you didn't catch a wave, or because you didn't ride the perfect wave, or because you fell? Or do you decide that the very act of being in the water, having the fortune to be in the water that day, makes it a perfect day? And if you take that analogy towards life, do you choose to be disgruntled because your day doesn't go the way you wanted it to, because the perfect wave didn't appear, or because you fucked up the ride? Or do you look at the day with just full gratitude that you had it to begin with, that you were in it? Gratitude is a funny thing. It's always there waiting for us to acknowledge it. And yet it's so easy to overlook. But when you do acknowledge it and you do take the space to give it some light, it kind of flourishes. And I know one thing that I am definitely grateful for, and that is you. Thank you so much for watching this. And if you haven't subscribed already, feel free to do so. Click the notification button. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, although I prefer the thumbs up. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Okay? Bisou bisou. À plus.
Coucou! Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. Merci!